The diamond ring caught the light like a dying star as Marcus Wellington III gasped for air, his manicured fingers clawing at his throat while $47 million in merger agreements scattered across the mahogany table. The private dining room of Chez Laurent had transformed from a temple of power into a theater of panic, where the city's most ruthless CEO discovered that all his wealth couldn't buy him another breath. "Someone call 911. The shout came from Victoria Ashworth, his business partner, her usually composed voice cracking like thin ice. She stumbled backward, her Hermes purse crashing to the Persian rug, spilling contracts that had taken months to negotiate across the imported Italian marble floor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus Wellington, the man who'd built his empire by suffocating smaller companies, was now suffocating himself. But it was Sofia Reyes who moved first. Not Victoria with her Harvard MBA, not Jonathan Pierce, the merger attorney with 30 years of experience, not even Dr. Hammond, Marcus's personal physician, who sat frozen in his leather chair like a deer in headlights. It was Sofia, the 28-year-old single mother who'd been refilling water glasses and clearing dessert plates, her weathered hands already positioned behind Marcus's chair before anyone had processed what was happening. "Someone call 911. The shout came from Victoria Ashworth, his business partner, her usually composed voice cracking like thin ice. She stumbled backward, her Hermes purse crashing to the Persian rug, spilling contracts that had taken months to negotiate across the imported Italian marble floor. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. Marcus Wellington, the man who'd built his empire by suffocating smaller companies, was now suffocating himself. But it was Sofia Reyes who moved first. Not Victoria with her Harvard MBA, not Jonathan Pierce, the merger attorney with 30 years of experience, not even Dr. Hammond, Marcus's personal physician, who sat frozen in his leather chair like a deer in headlights. It was Sofia, the 28-year-old single mother who'd been refilling water glasses and clearing dessert plates, her weathered hands already positioned behind Marcus's chair before anyone had processed what was happening. "Sir, I need you to lean forward," Sofia said, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around her. She'd seen this before, not in corporate boardrooms, but in the community center where she volunteered, teaching CPR to other mothers who couldn't afford formal training. Her fingers found the precise spot between his shoulder blades as Marcus's face shifted from red to an alarming shade of purple. The engagement ring, a 3-carat Tiffany solitaire that Marcus had intended to present to his girlfriend after closing the biggest deal of his career, remained lodged somewhere in his airway. He'd been nervous, actually nervous for the first time in decades, rolling the small velvet box between his fingers during the contract negotiations. When Victoria had raised her champagne glass to toast their success, Marcus had impulsively decided to share his personal good news. But in his excitement, he'd attempted to dramatically reveal the ring by placing it between his teeth, a foolish, romantic gesture that nearly cost him everything. Sofia positioned herself behind his chair with the precision of someone who'd practiced this maneuver countless times on training dummies at the Red Cross Center. Her first attempt was controlled, professional. When it failed, she adjusted her stance, her worn sneakers finding better purchase on the polished floor. The second thrust was stronger, more desperate. "Come on," she whispered, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down like the August heat that suffocated her own apartment. This man represented everything she'd been taught to resent: the wealth gap that kept her working 3 jobs, the system that valued profit over people. But in this moment, he was simply a human being who needed help, and Sofia Reyes had never been able to turn away from someone in need. The dining room bore witness to a tableau that would have seemed impossible an hour earlier. Crystal chandelier light danced across faces frozen in panic and disbelief. Victoria's phone trembled in her manicured hand as she tried to dial emergency services, her usual commanding presence reduced to helpless anxiety. The merger documents, representing the consolidation of two major pharmaceutical companies, lay scattered like fallen leaves, their legal language suddenly meaningless in the face of life and death. Marcus's assistant, Jennifer Kim, pressed herself against the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Seattle, her reflection ghost-like against the city lights below. She'd worked for Marcus for 8 years, had seen him destroy careers with a single email, had watched him negotiate deals that would affect thousands of lives. Now she watched a woman who probably earned in a year what Marcus spent on his monthly car payment fight to save his life. Dr. Hammond finally found his voice, shouting medical instructions that Sofia couldn't hear over the sound of her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She'd learned the Heimlich maneuver from Mrs. Chen, an elderly volunteer who'd lost her husband to choking because no one around them knew what to do. "You never know when life will ask you to be someone's hero," Mrs. Chen had said during training. Sofia had nodded politely, never imagining that moment would arrive in a restaurant where the wine cost more than her monthly rent. The third attempt sent shockwaves through Marcus's body, but the ring remained stubbornly lodged. She could feel his strength failing, could sense the desperation in his increasingly weak struggles. Around them, the carefully orchestrated evening dissolved into chaos. A busboy had appeared at the door, his eyes wide with fear at the scene unfolding in the private dining room. The maitre d' Claude Beaumont hovered helplessly, with his 40 years of service to Seattle's elite providing no preparation for this moment. Sofia's own breath came in sharp gasps now. Her uniform, a simple black dress that she'd bought at a thrift store and altered herself, clinging to her back with perspiration. Her daughter Isabella's face flashed through her mind, along with the promise she'd made that morning to help her with homework when she got home from her evening shift. The thought of Isabella waiting at their neighbor's apartment, wondering why Mommy was late, gave Sofia the strength for one more attempt. This time, she adjusted her technique, remembering something else Mrs. Chen had taught her about the angle of approach. She positioned her hands differently, creating a more focused point of pressure. The room held its breath, literally in Marcus's case, as Sofia summoned every ounce of strength in her body. The ring shot out like a bullet, skittering across the table and landing with a tiny metallic ping in Victoria's half-empty champagne glass. Marcus collapsed forward, gasping and coughing, his face slowly returning to its normal color as precious oxygen flooded back into his lungs. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the sound of his labored breathing and the distant hum of Seattle traffic far below.
"Jesus Christ," Victoria whispered, her voice barely audible as she stared at the ring floating in her champagne like some bizarre garnish. "Jesus Christ, Marcus, are you okay?" But Marcus wasn't looking at Victoria. He wasn't looking at the contracts that would make him even richer, or at Dr. Hammond, who was finally moving to check his vitals, or at the ring that was supposed to change his personal life forever. He was looking up at Sofia Reyes, whose calloused hands were still trembling from the adrenaline, whose dark eyes held a depth of compassion he'd never seen in any boardroom. "Thank you," he managed to rasp, the words coming out rough and raw. Thank you." Sofia nodded once, then stepped back, her professional instincts kicking in as she began gathering the scattered papers from the floor. But her hands were shaking too badly to make much progress, and she found herself staring at the contracts that bore Marcus's signature. Agreements that would likely result in layoffs, plant closures, and price increases for medications that people like her mother desperately needed. The irony of the moment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Sofia had just saved the life of a man whose business decisions had probably made life harder for countless people like her. She'd acted without hesitation, without calculating the consequences, driven by an instinct to help that ran deeper than politics or economics or class warfare. Dr. Hammond was finally doing his job, checking Marcus's pulse and peering into his throat with a small flashlight. "We should get you to a hospital for observation," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had been notably absent during the crisis. "Choking can cause complications, even after the obstruction is cleared." But Marcus waved him off, his eyes never leaving Sofia's face. There was something happening here, something that went beyond the simple act of saving a life. In the space of 5 minutes, the entire trajectory of the evening had changed, and possibly much more than that. The merger documents lay scattered around them, like the pieces of a puzzle that no longer fit together the same way. The ring bobbed gently in Victoria's champagne, its diamond surface catching the light and casting tiny rainbows across the mahogany table. And in the center of it all stood Sofia Reyes, a woman whose quick thinking and selfless action had just altered the course of not just one life, but potentially many lives. The question hanging in the air, unspoken but palpable, was what would happen next? How do you go back to business as usual after a moment like this? How do you return to the comfortable distance between server and served, between the powerful and the powerless, when that distance has been so dramatically collapsed? Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Seattle's lights twinkled like earthbound stars, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded in their luxurious eyrie. But inside the private dining room of Chez Laurent, everything had changed, and everyone present knew it, even if they couldn't yet articulate what that change might mean. The morning after the choking incident found Sofia Reyes standing at the cracked mirror in her studio apartment, braiding her long black hair with the efficiency born of necessity. Isabella sat at their small folding table, her 8-year-old legs swinging, as she worked through multiplication problems in a workbook that Sofia had bought for 50 cents at a garage sale. The apartment smelled like the café con leche that served as Sofia's only indulgence, a small comfort that reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen in El Salvador. "Mummy, why were you so late last night?" Isabella asked without looking up from her homework, her pencil moving with careful precision. She had Sofia's dark eyes and her father's stubborn jaw, though Sofia rarely allowed herself to think about Roberto anymore. He'd left when Isabella was 3, returning to Los Angeles with promises to send money that never materialized. Sofia's reflection stared back at her from the mirror, revealing the geography of her struggles. The fine lines around her eyes had deepened over the past year, etched by late nights working multiple jobs and early mornings getting Isabella ready for school. Her hands, which had saved Marcus Wellington's life 12 hours earlier, bore the telltale signs of her various occupations: small cuts from her morning job at the flower shop, calluses from her afternoon shifts at the laundromat, and the persistent ache in her knuckles that came from endless hours of washing dishes and carrying heavy trays. The studio apartment itself told the story of a life lived on the margins of abundance. The fold-out couch that served as Sofia's bed was pushed against the wall, covered by a quilt that her neighbor Mrs. Gonzalez had made from fabric scraps. Isabella's bed occupied the corner, surrounded by milk crates that served as bookshelves.
Bookshelves filled with library books and coloring supplies, organized with mathematical precision. The kitchenette consisted of a hot plate, a mini refrigerator, and a sink that had been temperamental since Sofia moved in 2 years ago. But despite the cramped quarters and constant financial pressure, Sofia had created a home filled with warmth and love. Isabella's artwork covered the walls: crayon drawings of flowers and rainbows, and stick figure families that always included just mother and daughter, but never seemed sad or incomplete. Sofia had made sure of that. "Mrs. Martinez says you missed parent-teacher conferences," Isabella continued, still focused on her math. "She wants to reschedule." Sofia's stomach clenched. She'd completely forgotten about the conferences, scheduled during her shift at Chez Laurent. The guilt that was her constant companion settled heavier on her shoulders. She worked 3 jobs to provide for Isabella, but sometimes it felt like she was missing everything that mattered: school events, bedtime stories, and lazy Saturday mornings that other mothers took for granted. "I'll call her today," Sofia promised, though she wasn't sure when she'd find the time. Her schedule was a carefully choreographed dance: flower shop from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., laundromat from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., and then Chez Laurent from 4 p.m. until closing. Sundays were for grocery shopping, laundry, and the precious few hours she could spend entirely focused on Isabella.
The irony of her situation wasn't lost on her. She spent her evenings serving food to Seattle's wealthiest residents, people who spent more on a single meal than she earned in a week. She'd learned to navigate their world with invisible grace, refilling wine glasses and clearing plates while remaining essentially unseen. The wealthy, she'd observed, had a remarkable ability to look right through service workers, as if they were part of the furniture. But last night had been different. For a few intense minutes, she'd been the most important person in that room. Marcus Wellington, whose face she'd seen on the business pages of newspapers left behind at the flower shop, had looked at her with something that might have been respect, even gratitude. The memory of that moment created a strange warmth in her chest, followed immediately by a wave of confusion. Why should his recognition matter to her? Sofia's phone buzzed with a text message, and her heart skipped when she saw the sender, Claude Beaumont, the maitre d' from Chez Laurent. She'd never received a personal message from him before, and her first thought was that she'd done something wrong, that somehow her actions the previous night had violated some unspoken protocol of the restaurant. "Sofia, could you please call me when you have a moment? Nothing urgent, but I'd like to speak to you about last evening." Claude. Isabella looked up from her homework, noting her mother's expression. "Is everything okay, Mommy?" "Yes, mija, everything's fine." But Sofia's mind was racing. Had she overstepped by intervening? Should she have waited for Dr. Hammond to act? The wealthy operated by different rules, and she'd learned over the years that crossing invisible boundaries, even with the best intentions, could have serious consequences. She remembered her first week at Chez Laurent, when she'd made the mistake of making small talk with a customer about his expensive watch. Claude had taken her aside afterward and gently explained that the clientele preferred their privacy, that personal interactions should be minimal and professional. She'd been embarrassed, but she'd learned. Until last night, she'd been the perfect invisible server. Sofia prepared Isabella's breakfast with mechanical efficiency. Scrambled eggs made from the carton of egg whites that was cheaper than real eggs, toast from the day-old bread she bought at the discount bakery, and orange juice watered down to make it last longer. These small economies were second nature now, so ingrained in her routine that she barely noticed them anymore. As Isabella ate, Sofia allowed herself a moment to remember the feeling of Marcus Wellington's life in her hands. She'd felt his desperation, his vulnerability, and in that moment, he'd been stripped of all the trappings that separated them. He'd been just another human being in need of help, and she'd been able to provide it. The memory filled her with a strange sense of purpose she hadn't felt since Isabella was born, and she'd first understood what it meant to be completely responsible for another person's well-being. "Mommy, you're staring at nothing again," Isabella observed, with the brutal honesty that only children possess. Sofia smiled and ruffled her daughter's hair. "Just thinking, baby. Finish your breakfast so we can get you to school." But the truth was more complicated than just thinking. Sofia was grappling with questions that had no easy answers. She'd spent years accepting her place in the economic hierarchy of the city, understanding that her role was to serve, to remain invisible, to be grateful for work that barely enough to survive. She'd made peace with that reality, because she had to, because Isabella needed stability and security, even if it came at the cost of Sofia's dreams. She'd wanted to be a teacher. That seemed like a lifetime ago now, back when she was 18 and believed that hard work and good intentions were enough to overcome any obstacle. She'd even completed 2 years of community college, studying education while working part-time at a daycare center. But then Roberto had left, and Isabella had needed her attention, and the dreams of standing in front of a classroom had faded like photographs left too long in the sun.
The walk to Isabella's school took them through 3 distinct neighborhoods, a geographic journey that told the story of Seattle's inequality in concrete terms. They started in their own area, where the apartments were small and the storefronts advertised check-cashing services and dollar stores. Then they passed through the transitional zone, where young professionals were beginning to gentrify former working-class streets, their coffee shops and boutiques appearing like harbingers of displacement. Finally, they reached Isabella's school in a neighborhood that Sofia could never afford to live in, but where the public school had better test scores and more resources. Sofia had researched Seattle's school districts with the intensity of a military strategist, understanding that education was the one path that might lead Isabella to a different life. She'd filled out transfer applications, provided proof of her employment in the district, and endured the suspicious looks from other parents who wondered what someone like her was doing in their school. But Isabella thrived there. Her teachers praised her curiosity and work ethic, qualities that Sofia recognized as inherited traits rather than learned behaviors. Isabella approached challenges with the same methodical determination that Sofia brought to managing their complex life, but without the weight of experience that had taught Sofia to expect disappointment. "Mrs. Rodriguez?" a voice called out as they approached the school gates. Sofia turned to see Mrs. Peterson, one of the other mothers, approaching with her characteristic smile that never quite reached her eyes. Mrs. Peterson worked in marketing for a tech company and lived in one of the renovated craftsman houses near the school. She was always perfectly put together, her blonde hair styled in a way that looked effortless, but probably cost more than Sofia's monthly grocery budget. "Good morning, Mrs. Peterson," Sofia replied, automatically checking her appearance and finding it wanting in comparison. "I heard there was some excitement at Chez Laurent last night. My husband and I were supposed to dine there, but we changed our plans at the last minute. Something about an emergency?" Sofia felt heat rise in her cheeks. News traveled fast in Seattle's tight-knit community of wealthy diners. She wondered what version of the story Mrs. Peterson had heard, and from whom. "There was a medical emergency with one of the guests," Sofia said carefully, her server's instincts kicking in. "Everyone is fine now." "How frightening," Mrs. Peterson replied, but her eyes held the hungry look of someone hoping for more details. "I hope the staff was properly trained to handle such situations." The implication was clear, that someone like Sofia wouldn't have been qualified to handle an emergency involving someone important. The casual dismissal stung more than Sofia expected, particularly after the strange validation she'd felt from Marcus Wellington's gratitude the night before. "The situation was resolved quickly," Sofia said, taking Isabella's hand more firmly. "We should get you to class, mija." As they walked away, Sofia felt the familiar weight of being judged and found wanting by people who had never had to choose between paying rent and buying school supplies. Mrs. Peterson's assumption that Sofia had probably stood helplessly while someone else handled the emergency was infuriating precisely because it was so typical of how people saw her, as peripheral, incompetent, irrelevant. But last night, she hadn't been irrelevant. Last night, she had been essential. The contradiction between those two realities, Sofia as invisible server and Sofia as lifesaver, created a tension in her chest that she couldn't resolve. She had spent years carefully managing her expectations, teaching herself not to want more than survival, not to dream beyond the next paycheck. But Marcus Wellington's gratitude had awakened something in her that she thought was safely buried. After dropping Isabella at school, Sofia walked to the flower shop where her morning shift awaited. The owner, Mr. Kim, was a kind man who paid her cash and didn't ask too many questions about her immigration status. The work was physically demanding, but straightforward, arranging bouquets, helping customers, and maintaining the inventory of cut flowers that arrived fresh from various growers around the Pacific Northwest. The shop smelled like jasmine and roses, a marked contrast to the industrial cleaners that permeated the laundromat where she'd work later. Sofia found peace in the precise work of flower arranging, the way different colors and textures could be combined to create something beautiful from individual elements. It reminded her of the way she had learned to build a life for herself and Isabella, taking whatever materials were available and crafting something meaningful from them. As she worked, Sofia's mind returned repeatedly to the previous evening. She found herself replaying the moment when Marcus had looked at her with genuine gratitude, when she'd felt truly seen for perhaps the first time in years. The feeling was intoxicating and dangerous, a reminder of dreams she'd abandoned and ambitions she'd learned not to nurture. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Claude Beaumont, this one more urgent. "Sofia, please call me as soon as possible. There have been some developments regarding last night that we need to discuss." Sofia's hands stilled in their work, a half-arranged bouquet forgotten as anxiety flooded through her system. Developments could mean anything: lawsuits, firings, deportation. In her experience, when wealthy people had developments to discuss, it rarely ended well for people like her. But mixed with the fear was something else. A tiny spark of curiosity about what Marcus Wellington might have said about her after she left. Did he remember her name? Had he asked about her? The questions made her feel foolish and hopeful in equal measure, emotions she couldn't afford to indulge. Mr. Kim noticed her distraction and approached with concern. "Sofia, is everything all right? You seem worried." "It's nothing, Mr. Kim. Just a situation at my other job." He nodded, understanding. "You work too hard, Sofia. It's not healthy, all these jobs." She appreciated his concern, but they both knew she didn't have a choice. 3 jobs was what it took to afford their apartment, Isabella's school supplies, and the small emergency fund that she was slowly building for unexpected crises. Sofia had learned not to take chances with financial security. She'd seen too many women lose everything when they allowed themselves to depend on situations that seemed stable but weren't. The morning passed slowly, each flower arrangement a meditation that couldn't quite calm her racing thoughts. Sofia found herself wondering what Marcus Wellington was doing at that moment, whether he'd returned to his normal routine of meetings and negotiations, whether the previous evening had affected him at all. She imagined him in some glass-walled conference room making decisions that would impact thousands of lives, possibly forgetting all about the waitress who'd saved his life. The thought bothered her more than it should have. Sofia's hands trembled as she dialed Claude Beaumont's number during her break from the flower shop. She'd found a quiet spot behind the building, surrounded by discarded flower stems and the distant hum of Seattle traffic, her heart hammering against her ribs as the phone rang. "Sofia, thank you for calling." Claude's refined voice carried an unusual tension. "I need to see you before your shift tonight. Can you come in an hour early? Is something wrong? Did I do something?" "No, Sofia. Quite the opposite, actually. But there are complications, things I need to explain before you interact with the customers tonight." The word complications sent ice through Sofia's veins. In her experience, complications meant deportation hearings, eviction notices, or child protective services asking questions about Isabella's living situation. She learned to brace herself for the worst-case scenario because hope was a luxury she couldn't afford to indulge. Sofia arrived at Chez Laurent 90 minutes before her shift, using her employee entrance to avoid the main dining room where she might encounter customers. The restaurant felt different in the afternoon light, less magical, more stark. The carefully orchestrated ambiance that made evening diners feel special was revealed to be the product of calculated lighting, strategic music, and theatrical presentation. Claude met her in his small office, a windowless room behind the kitchen that smelled like espresso and old leather. He was a man in his mid-60s who'd worked in high-end restaurants for 40 years, his silver hair always perfectly groomed, and his manner unfailingly professional. But today, he looked tired.
"Sit down, Sofia." He gestured to the single chair across from his cluttered desk. "I need to tell you what's been happening since last night." Sofia perched on the edge of the chair, every muscle in her body tense. "What kind of things?" "First, the good news. Mr. Wellington is perfectly fine. Dr. Hammond confirmed that you performed the Heimlich maneuver correctly and prevented what could have been a tragedy. He wanted me to express his gratitude again. Relief flooded through Sofia's system, followed immediately by suspicion. Good news was rarely delivered with such gravity in Claude's office. However, he continued, confirming her instincts, Mr. Wellington has made some requests regarding you. What kind of requests? Claude shifted uncomfortably, his usually smooth demeanor cracking slightly. He wants to offer you a position as his personal assistant, full-time, with benefits, starting salary of $75,000 per year. The number hit Sofia like a physical blow. $75,000, more than twice what she earned from all 3 jobs combined, enough to move out of the studio apartment, enough to stop buying day-old bread and watered-down orange juice, enough to give Isabella the kind of life that Sofia had only imagined in her most optimistic moments. She started, then stopped, unable to find words for the magnitude of what he was offering. There's more. Claude said gently, he's also established a college fund for Isabella, $50,000, with additional contributions annually until she reaches 18. Sofia's vision blurred. She pressed her hands against her knees to stop them from shaking, trying to process information that seemed too good to be true. In her experience, when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. What does he want in return? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Claude's expression grew more complex. That's where things become complicated. The position would require you to relocate to his estate in Medina. There's a guest house where you and Isabella could live. She'd attend Bellevue International School, one of the best private schools in the state. Sofia's mind raced. Medina was where Seattle's tech billionaires lived, a world so far removed from her current reality that it might as well have been another planet. The idea of Isabella attending private school, of living somewhere with more than one room, of not worrying about money, it was overwhelming. But, she said, because she could hear the but in Claude's tone. But it would mean leaving everything you've built here, your other jobs, your community, your independence. You'd be living on his property, dependent on his employment. And, Sofia, Claude leaned forward, his expression serious. Men like Marcus Wellington don't make gestures like this without expecting something in return, even if they don't explicitly state what that something is. The implication hung heavy between them. Sofia had encountered enough wealthy men in her years of service work to understand the subtext, the generous benefactor who expected gratitude to be expressed in increasingly personal ways, the employer who started with professional boundaries that gradually eroded, the patron who believed that his financial support purchased more than just labor. Has he said anything specific about expectations? Sofia asked, hating that she had to voice the question. Not explicitly, but Victoria Ashworth, his business partner, made some comments to me earlier that suggested she views this arrangement with considerable skepticism. She implied that Marcus's interests might not be entirely professional. Sofia closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of impossible choices settling on her shoulders. The opportunity was life-changing, potentially transformational for Isabella's future. But the cost, her autonomy, her dignity, potentially her safety, might be too high to pay. There's something else you should know, Claude continued. The story of last night is spreading through the city's social circles. Marcus hasn't been subtle about praising your actions. By tomorrow, everyone will know that the waitress from Chez Laurent saved his life. Is that bad? It depends. Fame can be dangerous for someone in your position. Immigration lawyers have already started calling the restaurant wanting to represent you pro bono. Reporters are asking questions. This level of attention... Claude didn't need to finish. Sofia understood the implications. Attention meant scrutiny. Scrutiny meant questions about her legal status, her living situation, her ability to care for Isabella. Even positive attention could destroy the carefully constructed life she had built in the shadows. I need time to think, Sofia said, standing up abruptly. The small office suddenly felt suffocating. Of course. But Sofia, you should know, Marcus Wellington is not a patient man. He's accustomed to getting what he wants when he wants it. The longer you take to decide, the more persistent his offers might become. Sofia left Claude's office with her head spinning, walking through the restaurant's elegant dining room toward the employee break room. The lunch crowd was finishing their meals, business people in expensive suits discussing deals that would reshape industries. She moved among them invisibly, refilling water glasses and clearing plates while her mind struggled to process the morning's revelations. $75,000. A college fund for Isabella, a private school education, a life where she wouldn't have to choose between rent and groceries, where she could be present for parent-teacher conferences and school plays. The possibilities were intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. But the cost, potentially her independence, her dignity, her safety, was equally daunting. Sofia had learned to navigate the world as an invisible person, someone who avoided attention and confrontation. The idea of being in Marcus Wellington's orbit, subject to his whims and expectations, made her stomach clench with anxiety. During her break, she called Mrs. Gonzalez, her elderly neighbor who watched Isabella when Sofia worked evening shifts. Mrs. Gonzalez had lived in Seattle for 30 years, had raised 5 children as a single mother, and possessed the kind of hard-earned wisdom that Sofia valued above all else. "Mija," Mrs. Gonzalez said after Sofia explained the situation, "let me tell you something about rich men. They don't give away money without expecting something back. The question is whether what they want is something you can give without losing yourself. But the opportunity for Isabella is meaningless if her mother is destroyed in the process. Isabella needs you strong and whole, not grateful and diminished." The conversation left Sofia feeling more conflicted than ever. That evening, as she served dinner to Chez Laurent's wealthy clientele, she found herself studying their faces with new intensity. These people, software executives, real estate developers, pharmaceutical CEOs, lived in a world where $75,000 was pocket change, where private schools were a given rather than a dream. She'd served them for 2 years without feeling particularly resentful. Her situation was what it was, and dwelling on inequality didn't change her circumstances. But now, with Marcus Wellington's offer hanging over her head, she felt the gulf between their worlds more acutely. These people had power, influence, choices. She had survival skills and a fierce determination to protect her daughter. The evening shift passed slowly, each customer interaction colored by her awareness of being watched and evaluated. Other servers whispered about her newfound fame, their conversations a mixture of admiration and jealousy. Louis, who'd worked at the restaurant longer than anyone, pulled her aside during a quiet moment. "Be careful, Sofia," he said quietly. "I've seen what happens to people like us when we get involved with people like him. It doesn't usually end well." "What do you mean?" "Rich men collect people the way they collect art or cars. They like having beautiful, interesting things around them. But when they get bored or when the thing they collected becomes inconvenient, they find new toys." His words echoed in Sofia's mind as she finished her shift and walked home through Seattle's quiet streets. The city looked different now, as if Marcus Wellington's offer had shifted her perspective on everything. The expensive condos towering over the Sound, the homeless encampments beneath the freeway overpasses, the gentrification that was slowly erasing the neighborhoods where immigrants like her could afford to live. All of it seemed more visible, more personally relevant. Isabella was asleep when Sofia arrived home, her homework completed and stacked neatly on their small table. Mrs. Gonzalez reported that the 8-year-old had been unusually quiet, as if sensing her mother's anxiety despite Sofia's attempts to hide it.
Sofia sat in the dark apartment, listening to her daughter's steady breathing and trying to imagine what their life might look like in Marcus Wellington's world. Isabella in a private school uniform, living in a guest house that was probably larger than most people's primary homes, having opportunities that Sofia had never dared to dream of. But the cost, potentially her independence, her dignity, her safety, was equally daunting. The next morning brought new complications that Sofia hadn't anticipated. As she walked Isabella to school, she noticed people staring at her with recognition. The story of Marcus Wellington's rescue had apparently spread beyond Seattle's wealthy social circles into the broader community.
"Are you the woman who saved that rich guy?" asked the barista at their usual coffee shop, the one where Sofia occasionally bought Isabella a hot chocolate as a special treat. "I saw it on the news this morning." Sofia's stomach dropped. The news? Channel 7 ran a story about it. They interviewed some people who were at the restaurant, said you were a hero. The word hero felt foreign and uncomfortable. Sofia had never sought recognition for her actions, she'd simply done what needed to be done. But now, walking through her neighborhood, she felt exposed in a way that made her deeply uncomfortable. At the flower shop, Mr. Kim greeted her with unusual excitement. "Sofia, I had 3 reporters call asking about you this morning. I told them you were a good employee, very reliable." He paused, studying her expression. "You don't look happy about this attention." "I'm not," Sofia admitted. "I just want to work and take care of my daughter." But even that simple desire was becoming complicated. During her lunch break, she discovered that someone had posted her full name and workplace on social media, along with speculation about her immigration status and living situation. The comments ranged from praise for her heroic actions to ugly accusations about her motivations for helping Marcus Wellington. "She probably planned the whole thing," read one comment. "Staged the choking to get close to a rich man." "These people come here illegally and then expect us to celebrate them," said another. "Gold digger," was the blunt assessment of a third commenter. The casual cruelty of strangers dissecting her life and motives made Sofia feel nauseated. She'd lived in Seattle for 8 years, had built a quiet life based on hard work and invisibility. Now she was thrust into public view, subject to judgments from people who knew nothing about her struggles or sacrifices. Her phone rang as she sat in the flower shop's back room trying to compose herself. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Miss Reyes? This is Jennifer Kim. I work for Marcus Wellington. He'd like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss his offer in more detail. Would you be available at 4 o'clock? Sofia's mouth dried. I'm working this afternoon." "Mr. Wellington has already spoken with your employers. They're expecting you to be away for a few hours. A car will pick you up at 3:30. The presumption in that statement that Marcus had already arranged her schedule without consulting her sent a chill through Sofia's system. This was exactly what Mrs. Gonzalez had warned her about. Rich men who were accustomed to getting their way, who didn't ask permission, but simply rearranged the world to suit their desires. "Miss Reyes, are you there?" "Yes," Sofia said quietly. "I'll be ready." But as she hung up the phone, she wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. The net of Marcus Wellington's influence was already tightening around her life, and she hadn't even made a decision about his offer yet. The black town car that arrived at 3:30 was worth more than Sofia would earn in 2 years. The driver, a professional man in his 50s, treated her with polite respect that felt surreal after years of being ignored or dismissed by people with expensive cars. She sat in the leatherback seat, watching Seattle's neighborhoods transform from working class to wealthy as they drove toward Medina. Marcus Wellington's estate was everything Sofia had expected and more. The iron gates opened onto a winding driveway that led to a modern mansion perched on a bluff overlooking Lake Washington. The property was immaculate, professionally landscaped gardens, a fountain that probably cost more than her annual rent, and windows that reflected the afternoon sun like mirrors. But it was the guest house that took her breath away. It was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, and a small garden that would be perfect for Isabella to play in. Standing in the doorway, looking at furniture that was elegant but not ostentatious, Sofia could imagine Isabella doing homework at the built-in desk, sleeping in a bed that was actually hers rather than a fold-out couch. "It's beautiful," she admitted to Marcus, who'd been watching her reaction carefully. Isabella would have her own bathroom. There's a playroom upstairs that could be converted to a study area. The school bus for Bellevue International stops right at the main gate. Sofia could picture it all too clearly. A life where Isabella could invite friends over without embarrassment, where she could focus on her studies instead of worrying about money, where Sofia could be present for school events because she'd only have one job instead of 3.
"What would my duties be?" Sofia asked, trying to maintain some professional distance despite the emotional impact of seeing the guest house. "Administrative support, primarily. Managing my calendar, correspondence, organizing events, nothing too complex." Marcus's tone was casual, but Sofia noticed that he was standing closer to her than strictly necessary, that his eyes lingered on her face when he spoke. "And the college fund for Isabella?" "Already established. 50,000 to start, with additional contributions based on my annual bonuses. If you stay with me for 5 years, it'll be enough to send her anywhere she wants to go." The financial security he was offering was staggering, but Sofia had learned to look for the catches, the unspoken expectations that came with generous offers from powerful men. "Mr. Wellington," she said carefully, "I appreciate your gratitude for what happened at the restaurant, but this offer seems disproportionate to saving someone from choking." His expression shifted, becoming more serious. "Sofia, what you did wasn't just about the Heimlich maneuver. You acted without hesitation to save a stranger's life. That kind of character, that instinctive compassion, it's rare. I want people like you in my life." "People like you." The phrase could be interpreted as admiration for her character or as something more possessive, more objectifying. Sofia wasn't sure which interpretation was correct, but both made her uncomfortable. "I need to think about this. It's a big decision." "Of course, but Sofia." Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "I've been thinking about you since last night, about what kind of person acts so selflessly, so courageously. I find myself very curious about who you really are beneath the server's uniform." The comment sent alarm bells ringing through Sofia's mind. This wasn't about administrative work or professional appreciation. This was about Marcus Wellington's personal interest in her, interest that went far beyond gratitude for saving his life. "Mr. Wellington, I should be clear that I'm looking for employment, not a personal relationship." His smile was charming and slightly predatory. "I wouldn't dream of pressuring you into anything you don't want, but I also won't pretend that I don't find you intriguing, beautiful, intelligent, brave, qualities that are surprisingly rare in my social circle." Sofia felt trapped between his physical presence and the magnitude of his offer. Refusing him could mean losing the opportunity to transform Isabella's life, but accepting could mean walking into a situation that she might not be able to control or escape from. "I really do need time to consider this," she repeated, taking a step backward. "Of course, take all the time you need. But Sofia, I hope you'll remember that opportunities like this don't come along very often for someone in your position." The subtle threat beneath his words was unmistakable. This was her chance to escape poverty, and if she rejected it, she might never get another one. Marcus Wellington was offering her a golden cage, and he expected her to be grateful enough to step inside willingly. The drive back to her neighborhood gave Sofia time to process what had just happened. Marcus's offer was even more generous than Claude had described,
but it came with invisible strings that could strangle her independence. She'd be living on his property, dependent on his goodwill, subject to his whims and desires. But the alternative was continuing to work 3 jobs for subsistence wages, watching Isabella grow up in a studio apartment, denying her daughter opportunities that could change the trajectory of her entire life. When she arrived home, Isabella was waiting with Mrs. Gonzalez, both of them watching the local news coverage of Sofia's story. The reporter was standing outside Chez Laurent, describing her as a local hero, while speculating about her background and current circumstances. "Mommy, you're on TV," Isabella said excitedly. "They're saying you saved someone's life." Sofia looked at her daughter's proud face and felt her heart break a little bit. Isabella had never had reason to be proud of her mother's work before. Serving wealthy people wasn't exactly heroic in an 8-year-old's eyes. But now, for the first time, Sofia was someone special in her daughter's world. "Am I going to be famous now? Will people know who I am?" The innocent excitement in her voice made Sofia realize another layer of complexity she hadn't considered. This attention, this recognition, it was changing how Isabella saw their place in the world. For 8 years, Sofia had taught her daughter to be invisible, to avoid drawing attention, to accept their circumstances with dignity but without complaint. Now Isabella was tasting what it might feel like to be someone important, someone whose mother mattered enough to be on television. How could Sofia explain that this attention was temporary, that their real life was still the studio apartment and the careful budgeting and the constant worry about money? Mrs. Gonzalez waited until Isabella was in the bathroom before pulling Sofia aside. "Mija, I can see in your eyes that something happened today. What did the rich man say to you?" Sofia told her everything. The job offer, the guest house, the college fund, and Marcus's unmistakable personal interest. Mrs. Gonzalez listened without interruption, her expression growing more concerned as the story unfolded. "You know what this is, don't you?" she said when Sofia finished. "A job opportunity that could change our lives. It's a trap, mija. A golden trap, but still a trap. Men like that, they don't see women like us as people. They see us as things they can acquire, possess, control. The money, the house, the school, those are just the price he's willing to pay to own you. But Isabella will grow up watching her mother be owned by a rich man. Is that the lesson you want to teach her? That our bodies and dignity are for sale if the price is high enough?" The harsh words cut deep, because Sofia feared they might be true. But they also sparked anger. At Mrs. Gonzalez for making it sound so simple. At Marcus for putting her in this position. At the world for creating circumstances where selling her dignity might be the most rational choice available. That night, after Isabella had fallen asleep, Sofia sat in the dark apartment and tried to imagine explaining either choice to her daughter years from now. How do you tell a girl that you turned down the opportunity to send her to private school because you were afraid of the strings attached? How do you tell her that you accepted a position that compromised your integrity because you loved her too much to let her grow up poor? Both choices seemed impossible. Both choices required sacrifices that would echo through generations. Sofia's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Hope you're considering my offer seriously. I'm not accustomed to waiting long for decisions. M." The casual presumption in the message, the implied threat of impatience, confirmed everything Mrs. Gonzalez had warned her about. Marcus Wellington was already treating her like his property, like someone whose time and decisions were subject to his preferences. But as she looked around the cramped apartment, at Isabella's artwork taped to the walls, at the fold-out couch that served as her bed, at the hot plate that was their only way to cook meals, Sofia couldn't deny the appeal of escape. 8 years of this life, of constant worry and careful budgeting and choosing between rent and groceries, had worn her down in ways she didn't like to admit. Maybe Mrs. Gonzalez was wrong. Maybe Marcus's interest in her could be managed, contained, redirected into something purely professional. Maybe the opportunities he was offering Isabella were worth the risk to Sofia's independence. Or maybe she was already rationalizing her way into a decision that would destroy them both. The decision was taken away from Sofia in the most unexpected way possible. 3 days after her meeting with Marcus Wellington, she arrived at the flower shop to find Mr. Kim pacing nervously behind the counter, his usual calm demeanor replaced by obvious distress. "Sofia, we need to talk," he said, gesturing toward his small office in the back of the shop. "I've been getting calls all morning." Her stomach dropped. In her experience, early morning calls about her meant trouble. Immigration enforcement, background checks, or worse. She followed Mr. Kim into the cluttered office that smelled like fertilizer and old coffee, preparing herself for another crisis. "3 different people called asking about your employment here," he began, his accent thickening with stress. "One said he was from the Department of Labor, asking about your work schedule and pay records. Another claimed to be from Social Services, wanting to verify your income for some kind of assistance application that I know you never filed." Sofia's blood turned to ice. She'd never applied for government assistance, had carefully avoided any contact with official agencies that might scrutinize her legal status. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing. I told them to contact you directly." "But Sofia," Mr. Kim's expression was pained. The third caller was different. He said he was conducting a background investigation on behalf of a potential employer. He knew details about your work history, about Isabella, about where you live. Too many details. The room seemed to tilt around Sofia. Someone was investigating her life, pulling threads that she'd spent years keeping carefully concealed. The attention from saving Marcus's life had made her visible to people who had the power to destroy everything she'd built. Did he say who he was working for?
He didn't need to. Who else would have the resources to conduct this kind of investigation? Mr. Kim sat heavily in his chair. "Sofia, I've been in business for 20 years. I know when powerful people are applying pressure. And I know that pressure usually means trouble for people like us." The implication was clear. Mr. Kim was preparing to let her go. She couldn't blame him. Small business owners who employed undocumented workers lived in constant fear of government scrutiny. If Sofia had attracted official attention, she'd become a liability he couldn't afford. "I understand," Sofia said quietly. "When do you want me to leave?" "I don't want you to leave at all. You're my best employee, and you need this job. But I have 6 other people working here, all with families to support. I can't risk everyone's livelihood for one person, no matter how much I care about them." Sofia nodded, fighting back tears. This was exactly what she'd feared. That saving Marcus Wellington's life would expose her to the kind of scrutiny that could unravel her carefully constructed existence. The hero narrative that the media had embraced was revealing the complexity of her situation to people who might not view her story sympathetically. She cleaned out her small locker and said goodbye to the other employees, most of whom avoided eye contact. They understood the implications as well as she did. In their world, attention from authorities was dangerous, and Sofia had become radioactive by association. The walk to the laundromat for her second job felt like a funeral march. With each step, Sofia calculated how long their savings would last with one less income stream. 6 weeks, maybe 2 months if she cut their grocery budget even further. After that, they'd face eviction, homelessness, and the possibility that social services might decide Isabella would be better off in foster care. But at the laundromat, more bad news awaited. Mrs. Patterson, the owner, was waiting with an expression that mixed sympathy with resignation. "Sofia, honey, I'm so sorry, but I got a visit from someone claiming to be from the city licensing department this morning. They said they were investigating complaints about employment practices, asking to see all my paperwork for the past 3 years. Sofia didn't need to hear the rest. The pattern was clear. Someone with resources and connections was systematically destroying her ability to work, creating pressure that would force her into accepting Marcus Wellington's offer. It was elegant and ruthless, the kind of strategy that wealthy men used when they wanted something and weren't accustomed to being told no. "It's not your fault," Sofia told Mrs. Patterson, who was visibly upset about having to let her go. "I understand you have to protect your business." By the time Sofia arrived at Chez Laurent for her evening shift, she felt like she was walking through quicksand. Every step seemed to sink her deeper into a situation that was spiraling beyond her control. Claude took one look at her face and ushered her into his office. "I've been expecting this conversation. You've lost the other jobs, haven't you?" Sofia nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying. "Marcus Wellington called me this afternoon. He wanted to know if you'd given any indication about your decision regarding his offer. I told him that you were still considering it, but that he should speak with you directly if he wanted an update. Did he say anything else?" "He mentioned that he'd heard you might be experiencing some employment difficulties. He seemed very sympathetic to your situation." The casual way Claude delivered this information made Sofia realize that Marcus's interference in her life wasn't a secret. He was openly using his influence to eliminate her alternatives, confident that his actions would be seen as problem-solving rather than coercion. "Claude, what would you do in my situation?" The older man was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his desk. "Sofia, I've worked in restaurants for 40 years. I've seen wealthy men pursue what they want, and I've seen what happens to the women who catch their attention. Sometimes it works out well. Marriages, genuine relationships, mutual respect. But more often—" He didn't finish the sentence, but Sofia understood. More often, the women ended up discarded when the novelty wore off, their lives disrupted and their reputations damaged by the association. But you also have a daughter to consider, and the opportunities he's offering her are extraordinary. It's an impossible choice, and I won't pretend there's an easy answer." Sofia worked her shift that evening in a haze of anxiety and resentment. The dining room was full of Seattle's elite, people who wielded the kind of power that Marcus was using to manipulate her situation. They discussed business mergers and political campaigns and charitable donations as if they were moving pieces on a chessboard, never considering the human cost of their decisions. During her break, Sofia called Miss Gonzalez to check on Isabella, who was spending the night with their neighbor as usual. But Miss Gonzalez had disturbing news. "Mija, a man came by the building this afternoon asking questions about you and Isabella. He said he was from the school district, verifying enrollment information. But something felt wrong about him." Sofia's heart raced. "What kind of questions?" "About Isabella's schedule, where she goes after school, who takes care of her when you're working. I told him to contact the school directly, but he seemed very interested in our living situation." The net was tightening from all directions. Sofia realized that Marcus wasn't just applying economic pressure. He was investigating every aspect of her life, looking for vulnerabilities he could exploit. The message was clear: accept his offer, or watch her carefully built life collapse around her. That night, Sofia made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of going home to agonize over impossible choices, she took the bus to Medina. She didn't call ahead or make an appointment. She simply showed up at Marcus Wellington's estate at 11 o'clock at night, determined to confront him directly about what he was doing to her life. The security guard at the gate was surprised to see her, but made a phone call that resulted in the gates opening. Sofia walked up the long driveway, her anger building with each step. By the time she reached the front door, she was furious enough to override her usual caution about confronting powerful men.
Marcus answered the door himself, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Sofia's monthly rent. His expression shifted from surprise to pleasure as he saw her standing on his doorstep. "Sofia, this is unexpected. Please, come in." "I'm not here for a social visit," Sofia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "I'm here because you're destroying my life." Marcus's facade finally cracked, revealing something harder and more calculating underneath. "Sofia, you're an undocumented worker with questionable legal status who's been living under the radar for years. Did you really think that level of media attention wouldn't eventually attract the wrong kind of notice?" The casual way he mentioned her immigration status made Sofia realize how thoroughly he'd investigated her background. He knew about her expired visa, about the years she'd spent working without authorization, about all the legal vulnerabilities that she tried so hard to keep hidden. "So you decided to help that process along." "I decided to illustrate how precarious your current situation really is. You're one government audit away from deportation, Sofia. One jealous coworker's phone call away from losing Isabella to foster care. I'm offering you security, protection, a legitimate legal status. In exchange for what? For your companionship, your presence in my life. Nothing you don't want to give, but nothing less than genuine affection either." There it was, the explicit proposition that had been lurking beneath all his offers of employment and financial support. Marcus Wellington wanted to purchase her, and he was using her love for Isabella as leverage to negotiate the price. "And if I refuse?" Marcus shrugged, the gesture elegant and terrifying in its casualness. "Then you'll discover just how difficult life can become for someone in your position who's attracted the wrong kind of attention. Immigration enforcement can be very thorough when they decide to investigate someone."
The threat was clear and unmistakable. Accept his proposition or face deportation, separation from Isabella, and the destruction of everything she'd worked to build. Marcus had used his wealth and connections to create a situation where her only choice was compliance. "You're despicable," Sofia said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "I'm pragmatic, and I'm offering you a way out of an impossible situation. You can spend the next 8 to 10 years working multiple minimum wage jobs, living in poverty, watching Isabella grow up with limited opportunities, or you can accept my protection and give her the life she deserves. At the cost of selling myself to you? At the cost of acknowledging reality. You need what I can provide. I want your companionship. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement." Sofia stared at him, seeing clearly for the first time the kind of man who could build a pharmaceutical empire by treating human needs as market opportunities. Marcus Wellington viewed her exactly the same way he viewed any other business acquisition, as an asset to be purchased and controlled. "I need time to think." "Of course. But Sofia, don't take too long. The investigations that have been initiated can be intensified if necessary. Isabella's school has already received inquiries about her enrollment status." The casual mention of Isabella made Sofia's blood run cold. Marcus wasn't just threatening her. He was threatening her daughter, using the child's welfare as a bargaining chip in his twisted negotiation. "If you hurt my daughter, I would never hurt Isabella. In fact, I'm very interested in ensuring her well-being. But her current situation is legally complicated, isn't it? Children of undocumented workers often face difficult circumstances when their parents encounter legal troubles." Sofia wanted to slap him, to scream, to do something that would pierce through his calm, calculating demeanor. But she also recognized that she was trapped, caught between his resources and influence and her own legal vulnerability. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." "Of course. But Sofia, don't take too long. The investigations that have been initiated can be intensified if necessary. Isabella's school has already received inquiries about her enrollment status." Sofia left his mansion and walked down the long driveway in the darkness, crying for the first time since Isabella was born.
Not the careful, quiet tears she sometimes allowed herself late at night, but deep, body-shaking sobs that came from a place of rage and helplessness she'd never fully acknowledged before. The bus ride back to her neighborhood gave her time to compose herself, but not enough time to figure out how to escape the trap that Marcus had constructed around her life. By the time she reached her apartment building, she'd come to a terrible realization. She was going to accept his proposition. Not because she wanted to, but because Isabella deserved better than the poverty and legal uncertainty that would be their future if Sofia refused. Her daughter deserved private schools and college funds and a mother who wasn't constantly terrified of deportation or eviction. Even if accepting Marcus's offer meant sacrificing her dignity and autonomy, even if it meant teaching Isabella that sometimes women had to sell themselves to survive, it was still better than the alternatives he'd so carefully arranged. Mrs. Gonzalez was waiting in the hallway when Sofia climbed the stairs to her apartment. The older woman took one look at Sofia's face and pulled her into a fierce embrace. "Mija, what happened?" Sofia told her everything: Marcus's threats, the systematic destruction of her employment, the investigators asking about Isabella, the impossible choice she was being forced to make. "That man is evil, pure evil," Mrs. Gonzalez said when Sofia finished. "But he's also right about Isabella's opportunities and about how precarious our situation really is. There has to be another way." "What way? I've been thinking about this for hours, and I can't see any escape that doesn't end with us being deported or separated."
Mrs. Gonzalez was quiet for a long time, her weathered hands holding Sofia's as they sat together in the dimly lit hallway. Finally, she spoke. "Maybe there is another way, but it would require you to be braver than you've ever been in your life." "What do you mean?" "Tomorrow, before you give him your answer, I want you to make some phone calls to reporters, to legal aid organizations, to immigrant rights groups. Tell them your story. All of it. How a wealthy man is using his influence to coerce you into a relationship by threatening your daughter's welfare." Sofia shook her head. "That would make everything worse. More attention, more scrutiny." "Sometimes, Mija, the only way to fight someone who operates in the shadows is to drag everything into the light. Make him famous for the wrong reasons. Make him explain to the world why he's using immigration enforcement as a personal weapon." The suggestion terrified Sofia more than accepting Marcus's proposition. Going public would mean admitting her undocumented status, exposing Isabella to even more scrutiny, and taking on one of the most powerful men in Seattle with nothing but her word against his. But it would also mean fighting back instead of surrendering. It would mean teaching Isabella that dignity was worth defending, even when the odds were impossible. "I don't know if I'm brave enough for that." "Mija, you were brave enough to save a stranger's life without thinking about the consequences. You're brave enough to work 3 jobs to support your daughter. You're brave enough to confront a man who could destroy you with a phone call. The bravery is already there. You just need to decide how to use it." Sofia didn't sleep that night. She sat at their small table, writing out everything that had happened since she'd saved Marcus Wellington's life, documenting dates, names, and threats with the methodical precision she'd learned from years of managing their tight budget. If she was going to fight back, she needed evidence, a timeline, proof of the systematic campaign Marcus had waged against her livelihood. At 6 in the morning, she called Maria Santos, a reporter from Univision who'd left her business card at the flower shop 3 days earlier. Maria had seemed different from the other journalists, less interested in the dramatic rescue story and more curious about Sofia's actual life and circumstances. "I want to tell you the real story," Sofia said when Maria answered her phone. "Not the hero narrative everyone's been selling, but what's really been happening since that night at the restaurant." They met at a coffee shop in Sofia's neighborhood, far from the upscale establishments where Marcus's influence held sway. Sofia told Maria
everything. The job offer that was really a proposition, the systematic destruction of her employment, the investigators threatening Isabella's stability, and Marcus's explicit ultimatum. "This is explosive," Maria said, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad. "But you understand what you're risking? Going public with accusations against someone like Marcus Wellington? I understand that staying silent means teaching my daughter that we have no choice but to accept whatever powerful men decide to do to us. Maybe that's true, but I want her to see me fight before I surrender." Maria made calls while Sofia waited, reaching out to contacts at legal aid organizations and immigrant rights groups. By 12 o'clock, Sofia had a pro bono attorney named David Chen who specialized in immigration law and a commitment from 3 advocacy organizations to support her story. The article went live on Univision's website at 2 o'clock that afternoon with the headline, "Seattle CEO accused of using immigration threats to coerce relationship with restaurant worker." By 4 o'clock, it had been picked up by national outlets. By 6 o'clock, hashtag Marcus Wellington Predator was trending on social media. Sofia was at Chez Laurent, working what she assumed would be her final shift when Claude pulled her aside with an expression of amazement and concern. "Sofia, you've created a firestorm. Marcus's office has called 6 times demanding your contact information, which I've refused to provide. But more importantly, the Department of Labor called to inform us that all investigations into our employment practices have been suspended pending review of new information." The relief was overwhelming, but Sofia knew this was just the beginning. Marcus Wellington hadn't built his empire by backing down when challenged. He would fight back with everything he had. The counterattack came within hours. Marcus's attorneys issued a statement calling Sofia's accusations defamatory fantasies from a disturbed individual seeking to profit from a wealthy man's gratitude. They claimed that Marcus had simply offered her legitimate employment and that she had fabricated the coercion narrative when he withdrew the offer due to her unstable behavior. But something unexpected happened. Other women began coming forward with similar stories about Marcus. Former employees who'd been propositioned and then fired when they refused, a college intern
who'd been subjected to unwanted advances, a cleaning woman at his office building who'd been threatened with deportation after rejecting his attention. Victoria Ashworth, Marcus's business partner, released her own statement distancing their company from his personal conduct and announcing that she was reviewing their partnership agreement. Dr. Hammond, who'd been at the dinner that night, gave an interview confirming that Marcus had indeed made inappropriate comments about Sofia during the medical emergency. The story became bigger than just one man's abuse of power. It sparked conversations about how wealthy individuals weaponized immigration enforcement, how undocumented workers were vulnerable to exploitation, and how the heroism narrative often obscured the complex realities of people's lives. Sofia found herself at the center of a movement she'd never intended to start. Legal advocates used her case to highlight the need for immigration reform. Labor organizations pointed to her story as evidence of how employers exploited workers' legal vulnerability. Women's rights groups hailed her courage in speaking out against a powerful predator. But the most important conversation happened in her own apartment, where Isabella asked the questions that mattered most. "Mommy, why didn't you take the job with the rich man? It would have meant I could go to a fancy school." Sofia sat beside her daughter on their fold-out couch, choosing her words carefully. "Because some prices are too high to pay, mija. And because I want you to grow up knowing that we don't have to accept whatever powerful people decide we deserve." "But we're still poor." "We're still struggling," Sofia corrected gently. "But we're not powerless. We have voices, we have each other, and we have people in our community who will stand with us when we need them." 3 months later, Marcus Wellington's pharmaceutical company faced federal investigation for immigration-related violations and workplace harassment. His engagement to his girlfriend ended when the ring incident became public knowledge, along with his treatment of Sofia. The merger deal that had been interrupted by his choking collapsed amid the scandal. Sofia never got the college fund or the private school opportunity for Isabella, but she got something more valuable: a legal work permit through a special visa program for crime victims who cooperate with law enforcement. She got a full-time job with benefits at an organization that advocated for immigrant workers' rights. Most importantly, she got to keep her dignity intact. Isabella did get opportunities, just not the ones Marcus had dangled as bait. Scholarship programs for children of immigrants provided educational support, community organizations offered tutoring and mentoring, and she got to see her mother transform from someone who hid in the shadows to someone who stood in the light and fought for what was right. The studio apartment was still cramped, the budget still tight, their future still uncertain. But Sofia no longer felt invisible. She'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be silent when someone expects you to disappear. Marcus Wellington learned something too, that money and influence couldn't always buy compliance, and that sometimes the people you try to control have the power to expose who you really are to the world. The engagement ring, retrieved from Victoria's champagne glass that night at Chez Laurent, was eventually returned to Tiffany's. But the lessons Sofia had taught her daughter about dignity, courage, and the price of freedom, that was a legacy worth more than any diamond. Late at night, when Isabella was asleep and Sofia was planning their next day's carefully budgeted activities, she sometimes thought about the path not taken: the guest house, the private school, the financial security that Marcus had offered. Part of her would always wonder what that life might have been like. But then she'd look at Isabella's sleeping face, peaceful, untroubled by the weight of compromise, and she knew she'd made the right choice. Some prices are indeed too high to pay, and teaching her daughter that lesson was worth more than all the security money could buy. The story of the waitress who saved the CEO's life became the story of the woman who refused to be bought. And in Seattle's immigrant community, Sofia Reyes became something she'd never expected to be: a symbol of resistance, proof that even the most vulnerable among us could say no to those who sought to own them. Sometimes heroism isn't about dramatic gestures or life-saving interventions. Sometimes it's about finding the courage to remain yourself when the world offers you everything in exchange for your soul.